Today, we are looking at the federal budget. We're getting close to our transition from financial literacy towards U.S. government, but clearly we are not there yet. So, the one piece of information I need to share with you regarding this title slide relates to the word federal. Anytime you hear the word federal in relation to our government, think national. So, our federal government is our national government. It is the highest level of authority in this country. As the federal or national government, they are responsible for looking out for the nation as a whole. They are located in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, and they swing the biggest stick as far as governmental power. So, when you hear about the federal budget, we are referring to the national government's plan for collecting and spending money. You are going to hear about some pretty big numbers and unfortunately learn that our federal government, at least for the last 40 years, and that spans control by both Democrats and Republicans, hasn't done a great job of handling our nation's financial resources. In fact, if you in your personal life followed the example set by our federal or national government, you'd find yourself broke living in a van down by the river. Before hearing about the astronomical sums of money our federal government handles, let's look at the lowest level of government and the one closest to you, the VOJ, or the Village of Johnsburg. So our village has a village president and a board of trustees who seek to address local concerns of the residents of Johnsburg. So areas not addressed by federal and state governments fall under the purview of local government like city governments, townships, and village governments like we have here in Johnsburg. And believe it or not, our Village of Johnsburg government performs a number of services for its village residents. However, can you name any services performed by our village government? I'll give you just a moment. If you said Johnsburg Police, you are correct. In fact, the public safety portion of the village's budget will account for almost 40%, so approaching the neighborhood of half of the entire village budget. The village also maintains certain roadways, picks up trash on the side of the road, mows and trims along the road, and plows some streets in the winter. These would be examples of public works. We also have a number of public parks and buildings in the community. You might be familiar with Sunnyside Park, where you spent your 6th grade fun in the sun day. These parks require attention and maintenance and fall under the care of the village government. The village also subsidizes a portion of the bill for your garbage collection. So the village itself does not pick up your garbage. However, they do help cover a portion of the cost for anyone who lives in Johnsburg and has garbage collection service. Although as budgets grow tighter, I know within the recent past years, the village has actually lowered the amount that it will contribute towards paying your monthly garbage collection bill. There are also salaries for government officials. How much do you think it costs to provide all these services and a few more for the entire village of Johnsburg? If your guess was anywhere in the neighborhood of $5 million, that's right, $5 million, then you are correct. Now, Johnsburg is a community of about 6,000 people, and it costs around $5 million to meet their needs, at least at the local government level. Now, consider what might be needed by our federal or national government to meet the needs of a nation consisting of over 315 million people. Before looking at the yearly bill Uncle Sam must pay, what services does our national government provide its citizenry? How about a military to protect against threats, both foreign and domestic? What about Social Security, which was created during the Great Depression and was aimed at helping seniors who'd lost their life savings but couldn't go back to work and still needed money to survive. This program still exists today, but it's struggling. The government has borrowed from this fund to pay other bills, leaving Social Security teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. So while it exists today, it will probably have to undergo some fundamental changes if it even exists by the time you need to draw from it. Our government also provides healthcare assistance to the elderly as well as those people who may be economically disadvantaged. Medicare provides healthcare assistance for people over 65, while Medicaid provides healthcare assistance for people considered low income. Both of these programs are different from the Affordable Care Act, or what's often referred to as Obamacare. These are just a few, but there are also many other services that our federal government provides. The question is, how much money do you think they spend each year providing these services? Keep in mind that our village spent $5 million last year providing its small list of services to a much smaller population. If you jumped past the billions and guessed a number within spitting distance of almost $4.5 trillion, then you'd be correct. What does $4.4 trillion look like? Well, there are lots of zeros. And by comparison, you see what $1 trillion looks like physically. And remember, our federal government spent almost $4.5 trillion this year. On our next slide, we're going to learn about two types of government spending. However, you can see them mentioned near the pie chart that illustrates outlays, which is another name for expenses or bills. Those categories, which we'll see more about on the next slide, are mandatory spending and discretionary spending items. Within the pie chart, you can see more in detail as to where the $4.4 trillion goes. Coincidentally, what single category makes up the greatest share of federal outlays? That's right. Forecast to run dry, Social Security checks in at a yearly cost of $1 trillion. What category makes up the second greatest share of the federal budget? Defense does not come cheap, and in 2019, our defense or military budget checked in at $676 billion. In the upper right-hand corner, you can see the federal government's total revenues, or the money they have coming in. Do you notice a problem when you compare outlays to revenue? On the previous slide, you heard about mandatory and discretionary spending. Let's look at what those terms mean. Mandatory spending is spending set by law. This is spending that has to occur. It is not optional. It is required by law. So, for example, back in the 1930s, amidst the Great Depression, our federal government created the Social Security program. It placed a tax on workers' paychecks that would fund a program to pay retired workers over the age of 65 a small monthly benefit. Understand, this is not a retirement plan as many mistakenly believe. This program was created by law and thus needs to be funded year in and year out. So before our government sits down and figures out where the money is going this year, mandatory programs like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid must first be accounted for. After you make sure those programs are funded, then you get to make decisions about whatever other services you feel you need to provide for your citizens. The problem arises when your mandatory spending begins to demand more and more of your revenue, to the point where the only programs you can fund are the mandatory ones. And then there's not money left over to spend on anything else. So the best example, but not the only one, of mandatory spending is Social Security. The other broad category is discretionary spending. This is the spending that has to be approved every year if it's going to occur. Think of what the term discretion means. You've probably heard this program contains graphic violence, adult content, and nudity. Viewer discretion is advised. Well, for some of you, your ears immediately perk up and you say, I'm in. But the idea behind the warning is viewers' use of discretion or judgment before deciding to watch this program. If graphic language, etc., offends you, then you use your discretion and choose not to watch. Discretion is the idea of using judgment to decide. So, discretionary spending is spending that occurs from year to year based on the judgment of those elected officials who make up our government. Spending money on building and repairing roads is not something that has to occur. It is considered discretionary. While many of us like to drive on smooth roadways, it's not something required to be accomplished by our government. In looking at the 2019 outlays, what area of discretionary spending makes up the biggest percentage of government's optional spending? That's right. It's the defense or military budget. While certainly a military defense is desirous in some form, it is not required by law. Although we can see the perspective of our government based on its willingness to fund our military at the current level of $676 billion in 2019. So, where do these trillions of dollars that the government spends each year come from? Yes, as most of you are already aware, the vast majority of the government's revenue or income comes from you in the form of taxes. A tax, according to our textbook, is a compulsory payment, so it's not optional. You are compelled to do this. It's a compulsory payment of money that citizens and businesses must make to help pay the cost of government. So all those services we seek from the government come at a cost. Ultimately, we pay for everything that the government does or provides on our behalf. Remember, there is no such thing as a free lunch. Everything comes at a cost. You want the government to provide universal health care? Fine. Expect to pay more in taxes. You want the world's most robust and powerful military? Fine. Expect to pay more taxes. You want the government to supplement your income when you're old and can no longer work? Fine, but expect to pay more in taxes. Many people look to the government to improve the quality of their lives, but understand this all comes at a cost, usually collected in the form of taxes. Now, there are many different kinds of taxes, too numerous and oftentimes confusing for us to cover them all, but we're going to discuss 4 different types of taxes. The first of which is probably the only one which you have some familiarity with, and that is sales tax. Sales tax is a tax collected on products sold. Even at your age, you know when you go up to the store cashier to pay for items in your cart, if you have $100 worth of goods in your cart based on the price tags on the products, you know you better have more than $100 in your wallet, because the final price of those $100 of grocery cart products will actually be slightly higher than the $100 on their price tags because of sales tax. Sales tax is actually established by state government, so that's not the folks in Washington, D.C. In our state, sales tax would be established by the fine folks serving the residents of Illinois down in Springfield, Illinois. In Illinois, we have a 6.25% sales tax. So if you have $100 worth of goods in your cart at checkout, your final bill will come to approximately $106.25. Remember, every state is different. California has one of the highest sales taxes. And there are also states who choose to have no sales tax. Understand that all governments need money. So those who don't collect via a sales tax probably look to fund their coffers via some other means of taxation. Sales tax is a very important source of revenue for the 50 states, as it is their number 2 source of revenue. A second tax that we are going to look at is import taxes, which are often more commonly called tariffs. Import taxes or tariffs are taxes on foreign goods. These are not significant revenue generators for the United States government. Instead, they serve another purpose. The idea behind a tariff or import tax is that they are enacted to protect U.S. industries from foreign competition. Now, you might say, hey, wait a second, I thought free markets thrive on competition. And yes, competition is one of the cornerstones of the free market system. However, I also told you there is no country on the planet that practices a 100% free market. And tariffs would be another example of how our country, at times, deviates from a truly free market. Imagine that you have 2 car manufacturers, one a domestic automaker, like let's say General Motors or GM, and that we also have a foreign automaker. And for the sake of argument, let's say they make a similar type of automobile. So the quality is very similar. There are no differences. Therefore, let's look at how tariffs work and why they are enacted in spite of them flying in the face of free markets. So we have an American auto producer who can produce an automobile at the cost of $5,000, which is a totally fabricated number. And to move this point along, let's say they wish to sell this auto for a profit of $5,000. So the sticker listed on the vehicle window in the showroom is $10,000. Then we have the foreign automaker, who might be able to produce a nearly identical vehicle in terms of quality for significantly less, let's say $2,500. There is no one reason why they can produce their vehicle for less, but there could be a variety of contributing factors. One reason could be worker pay. In this country, we have laws that denote minimum wages workers can be paid. So regardless as to what a business would like to pay you, our government, in another deviation from the free market system, establishes a floor and tell businesses they can't pay employees less than that floor. Those same minimum wage laws that we have in this country may not exist in foreign countries. So foreign workers may be paid less, and thus the company can produce a car for less. Additionally, there may be safety regulations which keep workers or perhaps the environment safe in this country. In order to comply with these regulations, companies must spend money on special equipment, training, etc., which ultimately gets factored into the cost of doing business. Other countries may not have such regulations to deal with. And sometimes foreign businesses may be blessed with better access to natural resources needed to produce products, thus allowing them to produce at a lower cost. The bottom line is sometimes it is cheaper for a foreign business to produce their products, and this is not limited to strictly automobiles. So, as a result of the lower cost of production, in order to make the same $5,000 profit, these foreign producers can sell their products for less, say $7,500. Now the question becomes, if these autos are of similar quality, which do you buy? Most people but not all, because some understand at a deeper level the consequences of their choices, but most people will opt for the foreign automobile. I mean, why pay more for something that on the surface doesn't offer you anything more for your hard earned dollar? The issue, though, becomes if more and more people happily opt for the foreign auto, what happens to the dollars they are spending? And additionally, what eventually happens to the American auto producer? Yes, all those dollars spent on the foreign auto leave the shores of the United States and enrich the pockets of foreign businesses and by default, foreign countries. Then what happens to the American automakers and their workers if no one is buying their products? That's right, those companies disappear and so do the jobs they create. Obviously, this is less than ideal from some people's perspective. So the United States government comes along and places a tariff or tax on the foreign made product. Now, when you factor in the final cost of the vehicle, it's $11,000. So when it comes to making the purchase now, the American auto looks much more appealing. So tariffs are used to protect American businesses. They are used to inflate the cost of foreign made products so that American ones look more appealing. So it's protection. But just so we're clear, who's paying for the protection? That's right. You, the American consumer, get to pay more for foreign made products so that American made ones can better compete. This is not a free market in which the strongest survive, but this is also not a tactic that the United States alone uses. Many free market countries also enact tariffs to protect their homemade products against foreign competition. The third tax on our list of four is a property tax. And this one really irritates people because it's a tax on a piece of property you have already bought and paid for. Whereas sales tax fund the states, and we'll see income tax funds the federal or national government, property tax is what lines the war chest of local governments like the VOJ. An example of property tax might be the property tax on a home you own. In Johnsburg, the median home value is about $170,000, which means some of you may live in a house larger than the one I'm going to show you, and others may live in a house smaller than this example. The house I'm about to show you, with a median value of $171,000, is up in the neighborhood by the community club / St. John's. That's a neighborhood that represents the median home value in Johnsburg. A homeowner in Johnsburg with a home worth $171,000 can expect to pay almost $6,000 every year in property tax. As long as you own that home, you better have $6,000 every year, or the government can seize your home, sell it, recoup the tax you owe them, and then give you the remaining money. Bottom line is, this isn't optional. And what irritates people is that you never escape from this tax. If you own the property, you pay the tax. Now, this money does go towards community schools, libraries, fire departments, etc. So it funds services the community receives, but still, not many people enjoy paying taxes despite it being the only way to fund local government here in Illinois. The last tax is Uncle Sam, the federal government's biggest source of money, and that's income tax. Income tax is a tax on income that individuals and companies earn. Via your personal finance experiences, you should already have some familiarity with this concept. Essentially, for every dollar you make, Uncle Sam takes anywhere from 20 to 25 cents as part of income tax. So if your weekly gross pay is $1,000, your actual take-home net pay is only going to be about $750. Where did the other $250 go? Well, it traveled to Washington, D.C. to begin to pay for the $4.5 trillion federal budget. Remember, nothing is without cost, even for the federal government. When we look at the federal budget, the second most ideal situation is what's known as a balanced budget. This is where revenue, the money coming in, equals or matches the expenses or the spending of the government. Since 1969, this has not happened one single time. So that includes government dominated at different times by both Democrats and Republicans. The best case scenario is what's known as a surplus. This is when government revenue or income is greater than government spending, which is great because there is money left over. In all the years since 1969, this has happened only 5 times, 3 of which occurred under the presidency of William Jefferson Clinton, who happened to be a Democrat. Lastly, we have the most common scenario, which, if you engage in this practice on a personal level, would see you in financial ruin. But that's a budget deficit. And that's when you see the government spend more than they collect. Looking back as far as 1900, in regards to the federal budget, you can see in red all the years in which our government has run budget deficits. Based on this graphic, it's easy to see approximately when we lost our way as far as being fiscally responsible. Approximately what years did our last budget surpluses occur? That's right, almost 20 years ago, at the turn of the century, approximately the year 2000. And finally, you can see here who was president and how the national debt, overspending, was impacted during their tenure in the White House. Understand, and this graphic does point this out, and we will discuss this later in our government units, that it's not the president alone who determines the spending habits of our national government. Our Congress plays just as, if not more of, a role in managing the nation's money. It is, however, simpler, although often inaccurate, to blame one figure, the president, the most visible figure in American government, as compared to the hundreds of officials who make up our U.S. House and U.S. Senate.